Bruh. There are words that arrive late in civilization but early in experience. Bruh is one of them. It is a late word for an ancient sound, a contraction of brother, a compression of kinship, a signal that survives the collapse of grammar. When one says bruh, one is not naming. One is sounding out a recognition or a recoil or a resignation. It is not only what is said, it is how the soul breathes when it has already seen too much. To understand bruh is to understand exhaustion of meaning in an over-articulated age. It stands at the border where irony meets sincerity, where weariness becomes a form of wisdom. To utter it well is to know that speech itself has limits, and that beyond those limits lies only tone. Tone as philosophy, tone as truth. Bruh carries the residue of brotherhood, but the relation it announces is not familial in the blood sense, it is existential. It arises when two consciousnesses, standing on opposite ends of absurdity, share the same horizon of disbelief. It is not brother in the biblical sense of Abel and Cain, nor in the monastic sense of shared vocation, but in the tragicomic sense of mutual recognition under duress. Two beings witnessing the same ridiculous world and meeting its nonsense with a single syllable of solidarity. Bruh is both greeting and verdict. A nod across the wreckage, the condensation of a philosophy into a sigh. In that sense, bruh is a late descendant of all the interjections that have ever signified the limits of speech. The alas of the tragic poet, the tisk of the disappointed mother, the ha of the cynic, the of the skeptic, the yo of the street. But bruh differs in that it is not entirely tragic, nor entirely comedic. It holds both. It can mean this is unbelievable, or this is hilarious, or this is depressing. It can mean all three at once. It is a word designed for the contemporary mood, the mood of disbelief that can neither cry nor laugh, and therefore does both in a single gesture. Philosophically speaking, bruh is the sound of suspended judgment. It belongs to the lineage of epiche, the Greek notion of withholding assent. When Pyrrho the skeptic confronted the contradictions of perception, he counseled silence. Bruh is not silence, but it is what silence sounds like when it gives up pretending to be pure. It is the grunt of the modern skeptic, the one who has seen the TikTok, read the common thread, and knows that reason will not save us. And yet, within that resignation, there remains a strange form of care. To say bruh is not to withdraw from the world entirely, it is to stay just enough in it to register its absurdity. The bruh philosopher does not write treatises, he scrolls, he witnesses, he shakes his head. But he does so with an ethos of companionship. We see this together. The meaning of bruh is not solitary disgust, but communal bewilderment. It is the minimum expression of brotherhood required to survive the collapse of all larger solidarities. When I hear it, I hear the weary laughter of the human species, its last shared incredulity before the next meme, the next atrocity, the next miracle. There is in bruh a tone of incredulity that is distinctly moral. It is the sound of the soul saying, this cannot be real, and yet it is. The ancients might have said, "O gods," or "by Zeus," or "heavens above." But we, stripped of divine intermediaries, have only the horizontal gesture left. Bruh. It points not upward toward heaven, nor downward toward hell, but sideways toward the neighbor, the friend, the stranger who happens to witness the same collapse. Bruh therefore becomes a theology of the sideways glance. It is not transcendence but transference, the exchange of disbelief that keeps despair from becoming madness. It is, if you will, a secular prayer. Because it is brief, it can travel faster than thought. It can be muttered, texted, written with 3 letters, stretched to 5, brew, punctuated with ellipses, spoken under the breath, or shouted to the void. It is modular, adaptive, evolutionary. Its morphology contains its own philosophy, repetition without explanation, tone without doctrine, immediacy without reflection, and yet, behind that immediacy, the deep human impulse to share the weight of existence. If one wanted to treat bruh as a philosophical concept, one might begin with the question of relation. For it always implies at least two, one who sees and one who is seen. It is never entirely self-directed. Even when muttered to oneself, it imagines another's gaze. It presumes audience. That is why it thrives in digital space. The meme, the post, the clip, the comment, all these are invitations to the collective bruh. Thus, the word has become the minimal unit of online phenomenology. It is what consciousness emits when encountering the absurdity of another's consciousness. A philosopher of the future might write, "I scroll, therefore I bruh." But beneath that irony lies an older structure of empathy. The word's tonal elasticity allows it to carry compassion, mockery, despair, or delight all at once. When a friend tells you something catastrophic and you whisper bruh, it is sympathy. When a stranger posts something foolish and you type bruh, it is satire. When the world collapses around you and you mutter bruh, it is lament. And in every case, it signals the same thing: I recognize what you are going through. That recognition, however minimal, is what keeps language from dying. Consider the metaphysics of compression involved in this sound. Brother is reduced first to bro and then to bruh. Each reduction removes a layer of civility and adds a layer of realism. Brother belongs to the pulpit, bro to the locker room, bruh to the street and the feed. As the word descends, it also condenses. The more society disintegrates, the more the word must carry with less. In this sense, bruh is not a degeneration but an adaptation. It is language learning to breathe in thinner air. The philosopher of language might say that bruh marks the triumph of pragmatics over semantics. What matters is not what it means, but how it means. Its force lies in tone, context, rhythm. A single bruh can contain 100 emotional valences. It is the jazz of interjections, the improvisation of meaning in the absence of harmony. And yet, to hear it only as slang would be to miss its metaphysical resonance. Bruh is a reminder that philosophy begins not in clarity, but in perplexity. It is a sound that says, I don't even know what to say. And from that speechlessness, thought begins. Let us go deeper. Imagine that the human condition itself could speak. What would it sound like? It would not declaim, not argue, not preach. It would exhale. It would mutter a word half between laughter and fatigue. That sound, bruh, might be the most honest form of self-consciousness available to us. It carries the recognition that we are both ridiculous and sacred, that our tragedies are often comedies in disguise, and that understanding them completely is impossible. When Diogenes lived in his barrel and mocked the philosophers of Athens, his gestures were proto-bruhs. When Socrates, condemned to death, calmly drank the hemlock, the disciples who watched him must have felt that same stunned disbelief. Bruh. When Nietzsche looked upon the abyss, and it looked back, the echo that returned was surely that syllable of cosmic exasperation. The soul, when it reaches the end of dialectic, sighs. That sigh in our time has become bruh. If one wished to formalize it, one could call bruh the first principle of postmodern Stoicism. Where the ancient Stoics sought ataraxia, tranquility through rational detachment, the modern Stoic finds instead a resigned amusement. The old Stoic said, it is what it is. The new one says, bruh. Both express acceptance of what cannot be changed, but only the latter recognizes the absurdity that such acceptance requires. It is one thing to endure fate with reason, it is another to endure it with a meme. The second is not weaker, it is more historically accurate. The world no longer offers the dignity of classical tragedy. It offers the endless scroll, the looping clip, the collapse of proportion. In that world, bruh is the only proportionate response. It is not the death of reason, but its transmutation into reaction. And yet, there is tenderness hidden in the syllable. In certain mouths, bruh is an embrace. Among friends, it becomes shorthand for belonging, a password to intimacy. The very laziness of the utterance, the dropped O, the softened R, carries the warmth of proximity. One does not need to enunciate among those who understand. In this way, the word reclaims something that civilization has long lost, the casual sacredness of shared speech. When two people can communicate entire emotional landscapes through a single sound, they are closer than all the formal rhetoric in the world could make them. Bruh is thus the democratic form of what the mystics called the ineffable. It gestures toward what cannot be said, but it does so with humor rather than holiness. It is the mystical reduced to the memeable, the sacred translated into vernacular tone. There is, I think, something beautiful in that. But every beauty hides a warning. The danger of bruh is that it can become a defense against seriousness. Too often, the sound that once signaled shared incredulity turns into reflexive detachment. The one who says bruh too often risks never saying anything else. And there is a kind of despair that hides inside laughter, the despair of the one who sees too clearly but feels too little. The philosopher must therefore use bruh carefully, not as an escape from thought, but as the threshold of it. It should not replace reflection, it should precede it. To say bruh should mean, I recognize that words fail here, but I will still try. Only then does the syllable recover its dignity as a philosophical act, a pause before the leap into meaning. If we follow that pause long enough, we arrive at the metaphysics of astonishment. Every philosophy worth the name begins in wonder, said Aristotle. But not all wonder is pure. The wonder of our age is impure. It is polluted with irony, fear, and fatigue. And so our astonishment no longer sounds like how marvelous, but like bruh. It is still wonder, but worn down by repetition. In this sense, bruh is the rusted echo of philosophy's origin. It carries the astonishment of being, minus the innocence. It is wonder after wisdom, marveling after meaning. Perhaps that is why the word feels both young and ancient. It belongs to youth in its slang form, but to age in its tone. The youth says it to mock, the elder says it to endure. Both mean the same thing. I cannot believe this world, yet I must live in it. And in that shared unbelief, something like philosophy persists. For what is philosophy, if not the refusal to accept the world at face value? To say bruh sincerely is already to begin thinking. It may not sound like Plato's dialogues or Hegel's phenomenology, but it is thought nonetheless, compressed, weary, digital, and real. The word does what all genuine philosophy does. It draws a line between appearance and reality, between what is said and what is meant, between what we expect and what actually is. When I listen to the word closely, I hear an echo of another, the ancient Semitic bar, meaning son. In Aramaic, bar means descent, relation, continuation. To be a bar is to be of something, born of something. Bruh may be accidental kin to it, but the resemblance is poetic. The modern human, in uttering bruh, declares himself again a child of this strange world, unwilling but related, disbelieving yet bound. Perhaps that is its truest depth. It acknowledges relation even when meaning is lost. It says, I may not understand, but I am still here with you. And so, in its small, offhand way, bruh redeems language from the tyranny of explanation. It reminds us that meaning begins in tone, in breath, in a shared pause before thought resumes. If philosophy is to survive the meme age, it must learn to listen to such words. Not to patronize them, but to draw from them the fresh data of our lived perplexity. Bruh is one such data point, a field note from the consciousness of now. It tells us that irony and sincerity are no longer enemies, they are roommates in the same exhausted apartment. It tells us that disbelief can coexist with affection, and that even in the ruins of meaning, we still reach for one another. For all its casualness, bruh carries the moral seriousness of survival. It says, we are still trying to understand. And perhaps that is all that philosophy has ever been, a long attempt to make sense of the same astonishment that now requires only one syllable. Bruh, then, is not the end of thinking. It is thinking humbled. It is philosophy reduced to its minimal viable form, recognition without resolution, kinship without doctrine, laughter without cruelty, disbelief without despair. It is the sigh of the soul that still believes, against all evidence, that someone else might understand. Bruh